Hello, welcome to the Meet RX Success Story podcast. Today I have Mary Ruddick, and she's a nutritionist, teacher, and author of books online and educational programs. People come to Mary to resolve their otherwise impossible health conditions. She teaches them tools that they can implement to rebuild their own immune systems, nervous systems, holobiome, and microbiome, and once again take control of their health. Mary is also the owner of Enable Your Healing. She runs several programs online, including Systems That Heal and the Back to Joy program. Her recipe books and meal plans can be found on Amazon, and I'm sure probably on her website too.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mary, so much for coming to our program. We appreciate
Thank
it.
you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome, and we're so excited to hear your story. Can you begin by telling me what was your life like prior to coming to a meat-based diet, your health conditions, and what kind of foods did you eat?
Sure. So, I was a healthy kid, and I got kind of stricken by an infection while I was living overseas that damaged part of my brain and gave me a condition called dysautonomia, which is a dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system, or POTS, you could call it as well. And there are minor cases and major cases, and I had a major case. So I had a very bad case, and in the really major cases, you're not very functional. You don't circulate blood to the organs correctly. You don't circulate them to the back up to the heart and these kind of things. So you get the neuropathic damage, the nerve damage, just like a diabetic. And then you start to get the organ damage and all these kinds of things. So I grew up on a normal, I would say a healthier version of an American diet, but not healthy with what I know now, but definitely healthier than the average bear. My mom cooked from scratch, and we had eggs for breakfast and roast for dinner and all those things. We didn't have a lot of junk food or sodas. And my family honestly is very healthy as well. I come from good stock, but that infection that damaged my brain really put me on a tailspin. So I spent at age 18, I got very, very sick with that. And in getting sick, I started to try to make myself better. I had been an athlete before, and now I could barely walk across the room. And so I tried lots of what I think a lot of people go to. I did the vegetarian approach. And when that didn't work, I went vegan. And then when that didn't work, I went raw. And I did that for many, many years and really didn't question it, despite getting much worse, getting worse nerve damage, worse kidneys, worse liver, worse lung, worse thyroid, until I got to the point around year 7, I became fully bedbound. Now, before that, the illness lasted a total of 12 years. And so it's a bit difficult to talk about because it was so different in different phases, as anyone who's been ill will understand. But in the first 7 years, although they were truly awful, I wouldn't wish them on anyone. There would be moments where I could function. There would be days or parts of days where I could function or pretend like I was normal, put on enough makeup and fake it kind of thing. And I would then have periods where I couldn't get out of bed, like 3 months without having seizures and these kind of things. And so I was able to hide the illness to a great degree, but at year 7, I really crashed. And that happened to be my last year of college as well. And I couldn't really function at that point. So I wasn't able to retain what I was reading. I wasn't able to take care of myself. I couldn't stand up and cook, like none of those kind of things. I couldn't drive myself. I actually had a number of, I didn't know they were seizures at the time, but I was having all of these seizures. I thought I was passing out while I was driving, and almost, on the highway once. So I stopped driving at that point and ended up moving back and living with my parents out of necessity. And thank goodness for them. They were amazing. They actually deserve like gold medals and all the spoils for taking care of me then, because I was a bit of a nightmare. I was so sad about the loss of life that I had had. And I really didn't know what to do better, because I was eating fully plant-based, and I was doing all the things and going to the appointments. And at that point, I was on about 17 different medications, some of them quite expensive. One was $2,000 a month. So it was a really unsustainable illness to have. And with all the organs getting worse and worse. And of course, they were really all over. I had both 2 diseases in the thyroid. I had endometriosis, PCOS. POTS, when you have it bad, it dysregulates all of your organ function. So it ended up being a blessing in disguise, and we'll talk about that later. But anyway, it was pretty useless. And so my parents at that time, they had really shipped me everywhere. They had taken me to see President Clinton's personal doctor. They had taken me to Stanford, Cleveland Clinic. I was going and getting infusions twice a week. I mean, really all over. And I wasn't getting better. And so we started to think, well, maybe we need to look in a different direction. And I grew up in Ohio, where it's mostly Western medicine, at least it was at the time. We honestly didn't know about anything else. And I even remember if one of my sisters, I'm the last of five, but if one of my sisters is listening, I owe you an apology, because she at one point had suggested that I go see this natural practitioner out in Arizona, and that maybe some supplements would help. And I remember quite arrogantly thinking like, well, if there was something that worked, my doctor would know about it, that kind of thing. So I didn't follow up on it. I should have, but all worked out. So anyway, there was a couple real dark years there where I was just like a lump of coal in the bed. And then we started researching. I kind of got this insight that, as I think we all do on this journey, that no magic pill is coming. No one's going to heal us. If we're going to get better, we've got to do it ourselves. And so I really took that as my daily motto, and I started practicing it to every minute and every day. And like, okay, what can I do in this very minute to communicate that I want to be healthy, and that kind of thing. And I really made a solid agreement with myself at that point that I would genuinely do anything it took to heal. And I challenged that many times. So it was good that I did that. And I held myself up to that, because there were some hard things, as I think everyone goes through. But anyway, we started exploring other things. My dad has a scientific background. He's in physics, and my mom is a wonderful researcher. And so we started pouring into all of these books of people that had healed themselves. And ironically, these were all doctors, and they didn't use their typical treatment. And so we started trying it. There weren't any books written on the condition I had, but that didn't demotivate me in any way. It was just like, well, let's just throw a dart at a board and see if anything sticks. And so we did diets for depression, diets for anxiety, diets for heart disease, for cancer, lots of cancer diets, actually, fibromyalgia, you name it. And because of my dad's scientific background, we kind of had the mentality of like, okay, we're going to put a timeline on this. We won't question it until we hit that timeline, and then we'll evaluate if it worked. And so that kept me going through all the terrible die-off and rough phases that you can go through, and really gave me a wonderful purpose. But, to answer your question as to what life was like, at this point, I still wasn't eating meat. So it was awful. I was really sick. I had nerve pain. And for anyone who hasn't had nerve pain before, it's unrelenting. Medications don't work for it. Tylenol, ibuprofen, prescription drugs, nothing works for nerve pain. It's like you're in a seething vat of acid, and at the same time, someone is crushing your bones. And it's literally all moments of the day. And it doesn't go away with anything. So it was really torturous. And from that, I couldn't sleep, and then that deregulates everything. So, I feel like in movies, they always really romanticize illness. If someone has a diagnosis, they're fine. They're like going to roller coasters and and going on dates. It's not really like that when you're actually sick. You're literally being tortured, but or at least it feels that way. And so yeah, it was really awful. But luckily, I think it was a very necessary part of the journey, because we did find some of these books, and I found a book written by Weston A Price, which I would guess a lot of your audience would be familiar with. And I found it so fascinating, because here he was going to places like Tanzania and studying with the Maasai, and they were in one of the most deadly areas. I, who got sick from a pathogen, a tropical pathogen, was really afraid of going to somewhere like Tanzania for that reason. And there he was, and he was talking about how the tribe's members didn't get sick. They weren't getting the malaria. It was only the people visiting them that would. And I was like, oh, they know something. And then I looked at their diet, and they were just eating meat. And I was like, I haven't touched meat in a really long time. I thought meat was bad for me. So I reevaluated everything, and I was just kind of on the dot, started eating meat again. and then brought in liver and got into the Weston A Price Foundation and started doing ferments and all those kind of things. And along those times, some conditions would go into remission based on certain different things that we tried, like some specific, I'm not a big supplement person. I don't use a lot of them in my practice, but there were 2 supplements that did fully reverse my neuropathy, which was miraculous after 10 years for that to go away. And it went away in 6 months. So things like that kind of kept us going. And then my thyroid regulated and kidneys and these kind of things. And through the Weston A Price Foundation and eating the meats and doing these things, I was much better, but I still couldn't work. I wasn't well enough to work and really fully function. I was still on a number of medications, although I had cut from 17 to about 5 at this point. And I was still fully reliant on full-time care, basically. And then I learned about the GAPS diet, which the GAPS diet is a Russian diet. It's a meat-based diet. You can't do it as a vegetarian. It's a lot of stocks, a lot of meat, a lot of the full animal, nose to tail. So lots of focus on the organ meats and skin and those kind of things. And as soon as I learned about it, I started on it, and it was actually pretty miraculous. I mean, I should temper it because I don't want people who go on these diets to think that they'll immediately get better. I certainly didn't, but to see any progress when you're as sick as I was is like the angels singing from heaven. So just temper that, in your mind. But on day 3 or 4, I'd have to look. I kept a journal so I can find out. But day 3 or 4, my temperature regulated. And for someone with dysautonomia, that's amazing. Your temperature, it's like having the flu every day. So your temperature will go down to like 96 and then up to 104 and down to 97 and up and down all throughout the day, all the time. So you're always trying to change your clothes and the thermostat and sweating through blankets and all those kinds of things. And for the first time in 10 years, I was just a normal temperature as everyone else. I wasn't playing with the thermostat. It was wonderful. So that was a really good sign. And the version...
I was going to ask you, what supplements did you say you took that you said it helped?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so the ones that reversed my neuropathy were a form of B6 along with alpha lipoic acid, and that was combined with a ketogenic diet. So I had been ketogenic for a long time before I found GAPS, but I wasn't doing it fully correct, I would say. And I was still having some foods that would feed bacterial overgrowth. Like I would have a sweet potato or a sprouted sourdough that was like made from the local farm and all those things. But I would have that and work that into my carbs. And I wouldn't do that often, because I learned early on that carbohydrates really messed with my circulation. I had, it was actually very visual. My legs would just turn purple if I had carbohydrates, like bright purple, and it was very painful. So I didn't eat them very often, but yeah, but it took much more than just the basic ketogenic diet to actually heal from this nervous system condition. It really took doing the GAPS with about 6 cups of broth a day, everything very well cooked and soft, and lots of the animal fats. You don't do any vegetable fats at all in the beginning. And I did, if you're familiar with the GAPS diet, everybody does a very different version. So I had kind of a unique version, as we all do. So mine was really just meat and fat. And then I would have carrots and onions in tiny, tiny portions, really as a vehicle for the fat. At the time, I didn't know about the carnivore diet, or I would have tried it outside of the Messiah. I didn't know people were doing it for health benefits. Anyway, it was
your journey was like, you were on quite a journey, and then before you came to GAPS. So I can see why in 3 days that would really make an effect, because you've already done ketogenic, yes. You've already been on this long journey, and
I had done
your medicine to 5.
Yeah, no, really, because I had done about 17 different diets, and I wasn't upset about that. I was actually like, they were fun to do, and they were giving me purpose, so it was nice. And all of them I did for a good amount of time. I'm not a fan of people that jump diets quickly, because it takes so long for the body to regulate. You've got to give something like a good amount of time before you judge it. So I would really do that. And then of course we did all the other stuff, the acupuncture and light therapy and meditation and gratitude journaling and all that kind of stuff. That was actually a huge part of my healing journey, I would say. But yeah, so it was really remarkable within 3 days. And then within a month, there was the most remarkable news. This is really great. Of doing this old Russian soup-based, meat-based diet. I went for my neuropathy appointment. So it was about once a month, they would test my nerves. and I felt awful at the 1 month point. I honestly felt way worse for the first 4 months. I had way more seizures. I was dizzy. My legs were purple, but I was holding on to the hope that if my temperature regulated, other things were. And so when I got to this 1 month mark, I went for my appointment up at Cleveland Clinic, and my wonderful doctor did the nerve testing, and then he did it again, and then he did it again, and he's like, Mary, your nerves are working. And it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And so he was actually the one who was kind of my cheerleader, because I don't know, of course, but maybe I would have given up because I really was feeling rotten. But no, he was very certain. He was like, whatever you are doing, you need to keep doing. And so that was great. And I kept doing it. I just ate the same meat. I know a lot of people now, I really champion red meat far more, but I didn't know what I was doing. I hadn't studied this formally. So I was just eating chicken boiled in broth. That was basically my diet, with a lot of ghee and tallow. And when I got to month 4, I was able to come off half of my remaining medications. And by month 6, I felt really pretty normal. I was on a couple of medications, but I was starting to feel more normal. I remember having a 10-minute period in the car one day, because by then I could drive again. And I just felt normal. I didn't feel exhausted or burn out or sped up. I just felt normal. And I was like, I remember this. And then, yes.
When you were healthy before you got sick. Yeah.
Yes, because anyone who's been sick, you just forget what it's like to actually feel healthy and normal, just not like pushing yourself through something, and lumbering through something. So that was just truly remarkable. And during that time, all of my other organs were healing and these kind of things. And then about month 12, I felt well enough to come off my medication. So I did. I came off my remaining medications. I came off my breathing machine that I just used at night. It's like a sleep apnea machine, but it's a little bit different for dysautonomia. Because it's just that your brain doesn't communicate to the lungs to pump. So if you're awake, it's not a problem, but in the night it can be. So yeah, I went into remission, and honestly, I would say, so my diet has almost become more nerdy over the years, but I have more flexibility. I can now really eat whatever I want. I have no food allergies. In fact, that diet reversed my dairy allergy that I had growing up. Not anaphylactic, but it was definitely a dairy allergy. And now I can eat whatever I want, but I really choose to eat this way because I love how I feel, and I've associated it with health. So it's nice because as I travel around the world and I study with all these different regions, I can absolutely try whatever they're eating. But then as soon as that meal's over, I'm back to my good old healing stock and meats and liver and these kind of things. So it's been really good. Once I got into remission, I went back to school for nutrition, and then I've been working in the field and learning more each year. I would say it's such a fascinating field because you constantly learn more. But luckily, so far, knock on wood, none of those conditions have come back in the last 8 years, and hopefully they won't. I'm feeling pretty good.
Okay. So what are you eating right now? Are you doing carnivore or a version
Sure.
of?
I'm not carnivore, though I've done carnivore. So I never teach anything that I haven't done. And I've taught carnivore for the last 10 years. So I use it a lot in my practice. And had I known about it when I was sick, I absolutely would have gone in that direction because it's great for dysautonomia. And it's really great for people that are as sick as I was. It's my go-to, really. But no, I'm like, I would say probably 90% carnivore without any intention of deciding on anything. I am ketogenic still. I love being in ketosis. I love my even mood and energy. I love that I don't get sick. I love that I don't get colds and flus and all those kinds of things. So I love being in ketosis. But yeah, I eat mostly animal products, I would say. To the point that most people are surprised. I have to temper what I tell people when I come to see them. Like when I go to a new country and I'm meeting people, if I tell them I'm a nutritionist, they'll make me a green smoothie or something. So I've started just telling people I'm a food historian instead. I get fed a little bit better that way. But if you go Like I said, I don't have to follow a strict diet. So I really just eat what I want and what's around. So like today I had fermented salmon. I love fermented salmon. Yesterday I had a wonderful steak with some garlic and butter. I tend to do OMAD. I tend to do one meal a day just naturally. I work starting at around 3 p.m. Greece time until about 10 or 11. And so I'll usually eat maybe somewhere between like 1 and 3. I'll do my workout in the morning and then I'll work at night. And that works out really well. But here in Greece, we do a lot of lamb and goats and pork. There's a lot of pork here that's very good. I never really liked pork in America, to be honest, outside of bacon. I mean, who doesn't like bacon? But I was never really a pork fan. The way that they cook it here is so wonderful, though. So it tastes really good. It tastes like a fatty chicken almost. So we do a lot of that. I was doing a ton of the yogurts and the cheeses. The Greek cheeses are just incredible. And luckily I can eat all the dairy I want now. So that's very good. I don't do too many nuts or seeds. As far as vegetables go, I'll do the odd like broccoli or carrots or onion or garlic. I don't do the nightshades. I don't do the potatoes. I don't do those kind of things. But if I'm in a region that has it, I'll do things like green plantain or cassava. It just depends where I am. But that's always in a very small proportion to my meat or my fish, and then the stocks and the fats. I would say primarily, and I know this is a hard thing, I'm sorry, because it's not a clear answer, but primarily I'm eating the animal fat. So it's like the butter and the tallow and those kind of things make up the bulk of my calories.
Oh, okay. So you're very heavy fat rather than heavy protein. Is that what you're saying?
I am, but as far as someone who's in ketosis, I can actually eat a lot of protein and be in ketosis. And I tend to do better on a higher protein ketogenic diet. I do really well with the protein. But I'm lucky like that. Not everyone is like that. A lot of people I've worked with, if they eat too much protein, they can get thrown out of ketosis, those kind of things. And I can actually eat quite a bit. I would say the food that I gravitate the most towards outside of butter is protein. I don't feel right if I don't eat enough meat. I really find I'm not as strong. I don't wake up with as much gusto. My workouts aren't the same and all of that. So that's always on my plate. That's like a non-negotiable, but usually there's a good amount of fat there too.
Oh, okay. So has it been 8 years since you started the GAP and then to now, or?
So I started GAP's diet in 2010 and maybe even 2009. I hit, I would say like full, I'd have to think about it. Full remission, where I would really call it remission, like 2011/12, somewhere in there. Because I know when I graduated from my undergrad, I went back and finished my undergrad. I was off all my medicines and in full remission. And that was 2012. And then I immediately went back to school for nutrition. And really, I thought at that time that I had never been healthier, even before I got sick. And it's been interesting because each year I feel so much better. You get to a point where you're like, I couldn't possibly feel better than this. And then you do. And it's like you just keep breaking through these glass ceilings you didn't even know were there as far as health goes, which is so lovely. Yeah.
Awesome. You look wonderful. You look so young. You look like you're in your 20s to me. And I don't know.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yes, you look really beautiful. And I know you're in Greece and you travel around the world and all kinds of places, and you go to the blue zones and
Yes.
check out what they're eating there.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And so you've learned quite a bit that way. So you also help people with their diets. And how do you do that? Is it an online thing that you do?
Yeah, I just work online. I used to have a brick and mortar office. And a few years back, I was like, you know what? When I was sick, what I really wanted was to see the world. So I took it all remote, and I've been working remote since then, which has been so lovely. It's actually really fun because when I go to a new country, I can see some of my clients that I've been working with that I had never met in person. And that's just the best thing in the world. So I do this with about 60 appointments per week. And then I have lots of different side projects where I do classes and programs and things like that.
That's awesome. So how can people connect with you if they wanted to learn more, to get some healing information from you?
Sure. So you can go to my website. I have a lot of Kickstarter programs, or Quickstarter rather. So that's at enableyourhealing.com. And then some other like more in-depth courses as well. And then you can follow me on Instagram and on YouTube. I just am now putting up all my footage from all these years. So I just put up 2 videos today, and more will be coming. As for all the travels and the traditional diets, I really love to go and see a lot of carnivore tribes because I find them the most fascinating. So I keep an eye out for those. These last 2 were the Icarian Blue Zone kind of Mythbuster videos. They very much eat differently than people think. They're not sitting around eating beans and lentils. But yeah, so definitely you can find me on YouTube. It's a little seedling of a channel. It's my side project and my fun place. And then Instagram is Mary Ruddick at CNC.
Awesome. Awesome. Wow, that sounds fascinating. So what do they eat if they don't eat beans and lentils?
In Ikaria, a lot of pork. And you know the funny thing about it, I actually think it might be a little political because, you know, the history of Greece and Turkey has been sordid, right? They just have not gotten along for a very long time. And what do the Ottomans not eat but pork? And so everywhere you go in Greece, there's pork everywhere. And I think that was actually a very wise approach to keep the Turks out, because they wouldn't. Right. But yeah, anyway, there's a lot of wild pork, and that wasn't my theory, by the way, but it's a fascinating theory. And I think it might be correct because it's odd that the Greeks were able to hold them off for so long. And they eat a lot of goats and lamb. They eat a ton of fish, but goat, I would say goat is the main one. They eat goat at most meals, and then enormous amounts of dairy. If people knew how much dairy they ate, no one would believe it, because before each meal, they have a whole fried block of cheese, per person. They just, give you like a fried block of cheese, and then they drizzle it in olive oil, and it's usually fried in butter. It is delicious. And that's just an appetizer. So you can imagine how the rest of the meal is going to go. There were several meals that we had were nothing but different types of cheese. I'd have like 7 different plates of different kinds of cheeses that had been made on the island. So they eat a lot of that. And then they eat very seasonally. So in the winter, they're eating kind of like the Russians, in that they'll do a couple of the root vegetables, maybe carrots and beets, but otherwise it's just meat and dairy. And then in the summer, they have more of the plants, but it's really about 30% of their diet. It's not what people have said. It's also a vehicle for the fat. I would say they really eat enormous amounts of fat. So they have the wild horta, which are these sauteed greens. They're similar to our dandelion. They have a wide variety of different kinds. And then they have like raw carrot salads, or like a roasted beet salad with cheese and local walnuts or chestnuts, something like that on there. But these are side dishes. They're not their main dishes. So they really aren't a carb-based culture, I would say. They do eat carbohydrates, but especially in comparison to the rest of the Greeks in mainland Greece, there's not all the bakeries. In mainland Greece, there's bakeries everywhere. There's bread everywhere. On Ikaria, where they have this longevity record, I only saw 2 bakeries on the whole island, and they were never open, and they were tiny. They weren't, and the only people I really saw eating the bread were the tourists. Usually and I tried to keep an eye on it. I know they do eat it. I don't want to give the impression that they don't eat bread. Of course they do, but it didn't seem like a daily food. The bread would always be served, and then I would watch. Usually it was a man by himself. The old men go to the cafes by themselves and smoke their cigarettes and drink their wine and hang out for like 6 hours and flirt with everyone. It's great. But they'll always be served a thing of bread, but usually the bread wasn't touched. So it's just kind of there if someone wants it. But they also, at least with the bread, they do the French method of fermenting it. Well, they wouldn't call it the French method, but we'll say the old world method of fermenting it for 3 days to remove most of the lectins and the plant toxins and those kind of things. But yeah, so they now eat a good amount of the nightshades, which they did not before, but those really have infiltrated their diet. And I'm not sure that's... I saw some health issues with the kids that didn't exist in the older generations. So we'll see how long this is a longevity island. I'm not so sure about that, maintaining its status, but But they eat a lot of the tomatoes in season, the eggplant and the potatoes, but they don't eat them like we do in America. They do not eat them out of season. So they're there for 2-3 weeks and then the rest of the year they're gone, which I think is why they've been all right so far, because all of those plants, the solanine, the lectins and these kind of things in those plants have so many toxins, but our body can handle some toxins. And if we have 11 months of the year to clear those toxins, we're going to be a lot better off than if we're eating them on a daily basis. So I think that's why they've done all right so far, but I'm not so sure about the future generations. I will say, though, in Ikaria, in that blue zone, they don't import food at all, not even from mainland Greece. The little grocery stores that you would find were for the Greek tourists. It's not really a tourist island for foreigners. So Greeks will go and visit their family there, and that's who those markets are for. But they mostly have just local produce, and it's small pickings. It's like you can't go in with a recipe and get what you want. It's whatever is growing right now. And that kind of thing. And then they do a lot of wine and they smoke all day, every day. They smoke so much and they get so much sun. They're all like tanned, leathery, and all the goodness. They don't really exercise, honestly. They don't really go and walk and those kind of things, but they do go swimming. If they're on the coast, not the mountain regions, but the coast, they go swimming a lot. And they have a lot of purpose. They keep their place in the family really until they die. So they'll be working in the restaurants in their late 90s and still contributing. So I think that sense of purpose, along with the seasonal eating and lots of fats and animal products, has kept them quite well.
Wow, that sounds amazing. So what kind of drinks do they drink? I was just curious about that.
Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting question. They do herbal teas. There's a lot of Greek, they call them mountain teas, and you would think that it's all one herb, but it's actually lots of different herbs. One thing that really surprised me is that everywhere I went, they have herb shops, like in all the little villages, and quite good ones as well. But they have pennyroyal in all of the shops, and I was shocked to see that. I don't know if you know that herb, but that's usually used to create an abortion. So I was like, why are they all drinking pennyroyal? That's not usually found in herb shops. And it's usually just for that. At least that was my knowledge. But it turns out it's actually a very strong antibacterial. So they use it as like for a completely different reason. They use it for an immune stimulants and that kind of thing. So they drink pennyroyal. They also drink a lot of mint tea, oregano, thyme tea, and those kind of things. So a lot of herbal teas. And then they have their wine, which really should have a different name, because when you have this, I'm a bad person to judge wine because I actually don't really like to drink wine at all. I don't like the taste or the feeling, but it can be fun if it's social, but it's not something I would do on my own. But so I go to these wineries as such a newbie with the wine tasting, but I wanted to see all of their diet, right? And they put their two wines in front of me, and it was really interesting because they're completely different colors. One is like neon yellow almost, and the other one is like this rose colored. And I try it, and it didn't taste like any wine I've ever had. In fact, I would never call it wine. It tasted like a Russian beet kvass, like one that had been fermented for 6 or 9 months, just no sweetness. It actually fully dries out your mouth to where you're like wanting water or something else, like you're puckering. There's just nothing there. And they do the old world form of fermenting. And so it's very low carbohydrate. I would love someone to bring a little test out there, a little lab, and see what's going on there. It's fully probiotic and yeah, it's quite interesting. They also ferment it under the sea, which is very different. They dive into the sea and put it in these little tunnels and let it go. So they have a lot of wine. They're not short on their vices. And then really, I didn't see anything else. They're not drinking like fruit juice or anything like that. So it was kind of like wine, water, and herbal tea as far as I saw.
Okay. I was just very curious.
Yeah.
Okay. So I appreciate you so much coming, Mary, to share your journey with us. What an incredible journey you've had. And my goodness.
Oh.
And it takes years sometimes, years of healing to get back to normal. I know.
Oh, it really does. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's surprising how long it can take. And that's why I think the lifestyle things are so important, so that you can keep your head up and your spirits up while you're having to go through, because it's really a dark night of the soul, right? The healing is not guaranteed. You never know if it's going to work or not. And oftentimes your symptoms can be worse while you're trying to get better. And you don't know if that means you should stop or that you just need to be patient. It's a real hard thing for people to go through. And yeah, so I would say I think the lifestyle things are the most important. They certainly got me through and kept me uplifted on the darkest of days. And had I not had that morning routine with the cold therapy and the journaling and the exercise and all of that kind of thing, I don't think I would have gotten through. So yeah, I would definitely advise everyone to be patient, give the process time, and do anything to play the mind tricks so that your spirits can stay lifted in the process.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think it's wonderful that you help people with that journey. And so I hope that they can look you up and come and see. And can you tell them the name of your website again?
Oh, sure. It's enableyourhealing.com.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, Mary. I will be.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to meet you.
So nice to meet you too. I really appreciate you coming.
Anytime.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.